Basically, my fact is that I work at a house that they took houses from England and brought them over to here, and I work at a house like that. You know, the fun thing is that we can recreate history from England over here in Richmond now, which is something that a lot of people don't know. Hello, I'm Jill Pesesky. I'm the Curator of Education here at Agecroft Hall and Gardens.
Hello, I'm Peter Kirwan. I'm Professor of Shakespeare Performance at Mary Baldwin University and a trustee of the American Shakespeare Center.
I'm originally from upstate New York. I've been in Virginia for about 20 years. I came down originally to go to graduate school at William and Mary, and my idea was that I would work in an American Civil War museum. I did that for about 9 months, and I've been doing 17th century ever since. First a 17th century Virginia site, and then I've been at Agecroft since then. I've been their Curator of Education since 2004.
I'm originally from Merseyside, so very close to where Agecroft originated. I am a Shakespeare professor. I've been working in theatre and literature since 2011, and I moved over to America 4 years ago to start working at Mary Baldwin University with the American Shakespeare Center and the Shakespeare Performance graduate program, where I teach practitioners and scholars, and we train people in the history and the practice of early modern theatre. I was drawn to the period because I was really fascinated by this time in theatre history when the professional theatre was beginning. I was really excited to see and understand more about how the theatre started emerging as a profession at a time when theatre had been ritualized and working in community environments in very different kind of ways. So I got fascinated by this period of ingenuity and creativity when theatre was starting to make money, starting to institutionalize itself as a business. And that's what really drew me to the period.
Yeah, as you can tell from my other answer, I got here kind of in a roundabout way. I started with a different time period, but then I got a museum education job at a museum that was doing 17th century rather than 19th century, and we collaborated with Agecroft Hall. So I was just fascinated with the time period. It hadn't been something I had studied or looked at really very much at all. But when the opportunity came to come over here and lead their education department, I definitely jumped on that. So I sort of got an immersive experience because I had to get into all of the things from the time period, from how people lived as landed gentry in Lancashire to Shakespeare theater, explaining that to high school students, all of those things at once. So that's really how I got that immersive experience to really get into the time period. Agecroft was originally established and built in Lancashire. Originally, the family that owned it, their last name was Langley. We know that they owned the property in Lancashire from at least the 1370s. They built Agecroft Hall. They had the house in their family's possession until about the mid-1500s. Then the man who owned the house, he deeded it to his daughter, which is kind of something unique for back then. She got Agecroft Hall and 1,000 acres of land. She married a man named William Dauncey. The Dauncey family is the family that owned the house for the rest of the time that it's in England. They expand the house initially, then the house falls a little bit into disrepair, but in the 19th century we know there was a big effort to renovate it again, which is great. Unfortunately, they also, for the house, they also discovered coal on the property and began mining that coal, which undermined the house. By the 1900s, the family that owned the house wanted to keep the property, but they wanted to either donate or sell the house. Unfortunately for them, nobody in England wanted to or could afford to buy the house and move it. Luckily for them, a man named T.C. Williams Jr. and his wife Elizabeth were looking to specifically buy an English manor house. Their architect found Agecroft. They took it apart. We have about a third of the original materials. They brought it over to Richmond, rebuilt it on the James River. It was a personal house until the late 1960s, and then we've been a museum that has been exploring English history for the Tudor and Stuart period ever since then.
The original Blackfriars building had an extraordinary history, one of the old monastic buildings, which went through several uses at different points in its history. One of the most famous uses, I think, was the building in which Catherine of Aragon was arraigned by Henry VIII. By the 1590s, James Burbage bought the building, and that was when he refurbished it as a playhouse. And for a long time, it was a playhouse for the early modern children's companies, the Children of the Blackfriars, where they did their particularly scurrilous satires. 1608 was when the King's Men, Shakespeare's company, moved into that building. And that's where I think we really start seeing Shakespeare's craft developing in response to the theatre, particularly the affordances of the indoor theatre, the possibility to do closer work with lighting, with sound design. And we start seeing a different kind of playing emerging in that space. The Blackfriars, for a long time, was not of as much interest to theatre historians, it seemed. The popular association of Shakespeare with the Globe, the big amphitheatres, the big popular theatre. So when Ralph Allen Cohen and Jim Warren's Shenandoah Shakespeare Express decided to build its own home, this, in 2001, was the first recreation of Shakespeare's Blackfriars Playhouse. And the idea with that space was, we had ideas about it, we had images of other theatres, we had bits of designs, we had anecdotes. But what they really did with the theatre in 2001 was try to imagine the experience of the theatre in that time. So we've got a beautifully constructed playhouse, ornate carvings, we've got the tapestries which are used for trapping sound, but most importantly we've got the physical architecture of a stage which allowed us at the ASC to begin exploring what the broad shape and style of the indoor playhouse could do for rediscovering the plays which were written and performed there. I'm particularly interested in the fact that Shakespeare's company would have then been using that, taking place into the outdoor theatre and the indoor theatre, creating a kind of portability in the plays and reimagining them slightly for the larger scale of the outdoor theatres, the smaller scale of the indoor theatres. And the Blackfriars, in its current state, has been one of the most important venues for our understanding of contemporary theatre history through practice. It's a space which evokes the visuals and the impressions of a time, but it's really about how we use it, what we've experienced about how audiences respond in that kind of space of shared light and being up on the stage, and how the plays transform when you have an audience all around you who are visible all the time. That's been a really exciting thing, certainly for me, kind of coming from England, having heard about this theatre for a long time, getting to see how this theatre creates such a fascinatingly unique kind of performance experience.
Twelfth night in Tudor England. I think something that's important to sort of set up for everybody is Christmas as a holiday in Tudor England is kind of an adult holiday. It's not kids, it's not, that's more of a Dickens, Victorian era sort of rebranding of Christmas. It was a holiday that involved a lot of debauchery, especially before the English Civil War, of course. It was the 12 days after Christmas through Epiphany. So it's a great opportunity for us as a museum because a lot of places Christmas happens, and in America, we start to take our stuff down, but we have stuff up for Christmas all the way through Epiphany, so you can come and see it and see how they would have been celebrating. Lots of food, lots of drinks, lots of visiting with your neighbors. It was kind of a time to relax because you weren't harvesting, you weren't doing a lot of that hard agricultural work. So you would go door to door, wassailing, if you've ever heard of that. People would go door to door and basically pound on the door and demand, in hopefully a funny way, that you were getting some drinks. But a lot of feasts. All of the days had different days. For example, Boxing Day, which is still celebrated in England, that was a day where a lot of times people like Master Dauncey or landowners would give gifts to their servants or their tenants and people like that to sort of show their appreciation. So it was really a time for everybody to sort of relax a little bit, enjoy some food, enjoy some decorating, enjoy some games, a lot of ghost stories too, which is something you see a little bit with A Christmas Carol, of course. But that was a huge thing because it's kind of a dark, cold time of year. They like to tell lots of spooky ghost stories.
One of the most important parts of the Twelfth Night holiday was the appointment of the Festus, right? The fool, the Lord of Misrule of these parties. Twelfth Night is a play and a period which both evoke carnival time, and I'm really fascinated in carnival as Mikhail Bakhtin theorized it, which is this time of kind of licensed departure from the norms, a time when people can try out different ways of being, different kinds of expressing themselves. And the Festus figure particularly, the appointment of someone to be lord of a festival for a temporary time, licenses different kinds of behavior, different kinds of, a kind of rebellion almost against the standard ways of doing things. So it's focused on festival behavior, but it's also focused on a kind of misrule. One of the things I love about Twelfth Night is that it's very hard to pin down who the Lord of Misrule really is. We have a character called Feste, who is a sort of commentator on events, who moves from house to house, who is licensed to speak as a fool. But we've also got Sir Toby Belch, who is this figure who, like Falstaff in plays before him, is really defined by his bodily functions, his feasting, his drinking. And then we've got Malvolio, the Puritan steward, who is trying to transcend his own station. And on top of that, we have Viola, who of course is cross-dressing as Cesario. And throughout all of these four figures, what we've got, I think, is the carnival spirit of the Lord of Misrule, where you get to be something else for a limited time. And all of these figures experimenting with how they can take over the space, how they can control it, what happens if we follow our rules. And for me, Twelfth Night's misrule comes in the fact that it's not clear cut. It's often treated as like the upstairs downstairs play. We spend so much time with the servant characters or people who are not nominally in charge of events, but these are the characters who are determining the tone and the mood of the play. And I think that that's what's so important about the Twelfth Nightness of the play, that it is about what is possible when we suspend the usual rules. What is possible if we think about things in a different way or take a different perspective on them.
Unfortunately, specific to Agecroft, we don't have a ton of information from the time period, but we're lucky that other people were more diligent in recording their celebrations. So we have letters and diaries discussing the celebrations all around England. Also the music, there's a lot of music. That's just when you start having some early Christmas carols that actually describe what they're doing during this time period. So that helps us out a lot as well. And of course, we have some wonderful scholars like yourself and others who have done research on the time period and who are able to sort of tease out from these primary sources what we think the celebrations would have been like. So we are very lucky to be able to draw on those things. I think Agecroft does a really good job setting the scene for people for what it was like in England during this time period. Not everybody gets a chance to go over to England to see some of those original houses over there and how they celebrated. So we do our interpretation from around Thanksgiving through Epiphany is focused on Twelfth Night, belly cheer, the celebration part of it. We've got the greenery, we've got the food, and we talk about those celebrations throughout the house. We also have a special focus tour by one of our tour guides who is really become an expert on food from the time period, where she takes people around and talks specifically about dining during Shakespeare's time. And we even talk about it a little bit with some of our school programs. If we have kids, especially who are in during this time period, we make sure we talk about why there's so much food in the house and the greenery and what types of celebrating they did. And we also have a Yuletides event, and we do have some 17th century interpreters who specifically do a program that talks about dancing during the time period. Right. They do the Lord of Misrule. They do wassailing to sort of end it, which is really fun. So we have a bunch of different types of opportunities for people who like to experience the house in different ways, which I think then if they were to go to Blackfriars would give them some of that background.
Amazing. What I find so amazing about coming to a place like Agecroft is what it tells me about how even the architecture of these buildings shaped social relationships, right? That even though Shakespeare's plays weren't written for realistic depictions of buildings, all of the ways in which people of different classes move through these buildings. You know, on the tour, you were showing us the kind of, almost the route people would take through houses, right? What happens when you receive guests? What happens, you know, where can the servants be? Where are the musicians going to be? in the galleries above the Great Hall, for instance. And that I think is so revealing, because it's so hard on a bare stage sometimes to capture the social dynamics of controlling space. 12 Nights of Play, where people are coming and going, people of social classes, the space is so carefully managed. And I really think that coming to these buildings and gives you such an understanding of how the rooms were used, what it meant to arrive at a space like this, what it meant to run a space like this. And particularly for a place so full of those niceties of social hierarchies like 12th Night, I think seeing the building helps me, I think, as thinking from an acting and directing point of view, but also just seeing how people relate to one another. Just understand how those relationships are shaped by architecture and by the conventions of hospitality and hosting.
For Agecroft, I mean, basically we have a house that would have been owned by landed gentry. We have it set up in different ways, and our curatorial staff, our curator of collections, Libby Gerard, is very careful about making sure that everything is seasonally appropriate, because that's kind of how they would have run life here. This is a working farm at the time in England. So even though this family has money, they are also working within a community. And we do our best to also show that there would have been not just the family who owns the house that had the pretty things. They would have had a community of servants who work in the house who keep it running. They would have had a community of tenant farmers who were doing the work out in the fields. And they would have been an important place for gathering for the community. We know, for example, that there's a chance that they would have done some court cases out in their courtyard. It's basically a gathering place. There's a chance they perform some plays here as well, because a community like that might not have a standalone theater at the time. So a nice big space like this sort of shows how everybody in the community would have sort of gravitated to a house like that. And we're doing our best to kind of show that, even though it's out of the situation where it would have been or the context it would have been before.
I think one of the interesting things about the Blackfriars is that on the one hand, it's a historical reconstruction of a playhouse, but it's not trying to do period recreation. I think that's something we've really learned about how we, if Agecroft is a working farm and the Blackfriars is a working theatre, the working theatre side of the Blackfriars is not about asking audiences to kind of cosplay as 16th century, 17th century audience members, but rather to kind of engage into the kinds of professional relationship that one might have had in the period. So I think when we see a show on the Blackfriars stage, we're not putting it in early modern costume all the time. Sometimes we do. But rather we are saying, how does this environment of making theatre invite us to reconceptualize the act of theatre? Vanessa Morosco talks about the Blackfriars as a space which brings together people for a radical act of community. And I think that there's something really interesting in recreating an early modern idea of theatre where the actors are not separated from the audience, where actually everyone is sharing the same room and everyone is communicating together and collaborating to create an event. And I think that's something which we've repeatedly rediscovered, that actually in recreating the Blackfriars Theatre, weirdly, we're not creating something which puts us into the past, but we're creating something which kind of brings us into the present in an interesting way, and invites people to kind of see each other as we are now, but using these historical architectural features and using these historical texts to find something which speaks to a shared humanity. Yeah.
So it was interesting when you talked about trying to get the audience to do the 16, be the audience members. We do a school program where part of it is they do a scene from one of Shakespeare's plays, and obviously we have the kids who are the actors, but then the other students, we give them audience roles, and we encourage them to participate. At first, a lot of them are like, nope, I don't, or I feel weird, I don't want to interrupt them, I don't want to, and getting them to engage where that's also a part of the experience. Sometimes if they have never experienced that when they go to theater, if they've been told their whole lives they have to be very quiet and just watch and clap, it just sort of blows their mind that they're allowed to even cheer or holler in the middle of a live performance, and that's not a bad thing. So, but it does, it's bridging that gap of how people experience theater and how much you can introduce it to people without them getting a little bit uncomfortable with it being very different.
But I think that's a beautiful kind of point of comparison between, the embodied experience of walking around Agecroft and the embodied experience of going to the Playhouse, that it's experiencing history, but it's doing it with your whole body and your whole
yeah.
experience, right? You're not just kind of sitting, reading about it and separating yourself from it. You're
Right.
immersing yourself in it and learning new ways to participate in the world.
When we talk to the kids about the past, a lot of times, or even adults, I don't want to keep focusing on kids, but a lot of times they want to know, they want to think about who they would have been back then. Would I have been the person in the landed gentry? No, you're probably not going to be that person, but how did you experience your life back then? And even if we talk about if you had a job, that's not your entire life. And we love to bring in things that make people understand that these are people that had music, that they had parties, they had theater, they experienced theater in different ways as well. So I think it gives them the background about where they would have experienced these different things. I think sometimes when we think about the past, we tend to, again, think about either wealthier people, maybe people in urban areas, but just to continue that exposure to people about how people would have lived back then, and that these people who lived at Agecroft, both the people that own the house and maybe the tenants and servants, would have had an opportunity to see theater in some way, and just that this time period is so exciting for the expanding of the arts and at least what we know about the arts from that time period.
I'd absolutely agree with all of that. I think, to expand on a theme, I think that it's very easy to kind of abstract literature and history, and I'm really compelled by arguments that material culture, reimagining the objects and the environments and the rooms and the relationships that physical environments bring, transforms our understanding of the past and how we engage with the present. We see it at the Blackfriars, putting on a period costume or holding an object in a particular way or having an audience member in a seat right next to you can talk to. All of these things start changing your relationship to the words and start contextualizing them not in a kind of an abstract poetic value, but in I have to achieve something here with you right now. And I feel that there's something similar in what you're saying about Agecroft, right? That we start getting away from the abstractions of what might it have been like, and it invites us to start experiencing something of the ways in which people just existed as full human beings within a space. And maybe there's something there about the way it helps build empathy with the past, right? That we're not just intellectualizing ourselves into an idea of the past, but we actually get to encounter something of what it may have felt like to move or to live or to exist in a place on the everyday level.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
Jill, thanks so much for hosting us here today and for showing us around Agecroft, this beautiful house. And we will look forward to hopefully seeing you all for 12th night at the American Shakespeare Center's Blackfriars Playhouse this spring.
Peter, thank you so much for visiting, and we'd love to invite you all to come back to Agecroft Hall and Gardens to come and take a tour, go through our gardens, and come to some of our great events.